Next, we have the following question. To fully understand how taxes affect economic well-being, we must compare the 1. Consumer surplus to producer surplus. 2. Price paid by buyers to price received by sellers. 3. Consumer surplus to the deadweight loss. And 4. Reduced welfare of buyers and sellers to the revenue raised by the government. And so when we look at taxes, right, we can draw a really simple tax impact. So a supply and demand graph. Let's say there's a tax imposed on the consumer. What that essentially means is that the price of the consumer goes up. The price the consumer pays. The price consumer pays would be right here, and the price that the business gets would be right here, and this would be the tax level, right? The difference between the two taxes, the two prices, right? And so we can see here that output shrinks. And we have deadweight loss right here, right? So this is what a traditional tax might look like. And we see something similar if you had a supply side tax instead of demand side tax. But what must we understand for to fully understand the effect of a tax, right? One says consumer surplus compared to producer surplus, and so here we have like consumer surplus up here, producer surplus over here, but it misses this middle section of government revenue. And so we wouldn't fully understand the impact of the tax because government revenue is revenue that we assume will be spent on other goods that are good for society, so we don't consider that a loss, even though it's neither received by consumers or producers. Second says a price paid by buyers to the price received by sellers. And so this is something that is important. We say that the price received by buyers is up here and the price received by sellers is down here. But again, we're missing the total tax amount, and so that's something that's important to understand the impact of the tax, so it's not going to be fully encompassing. 3 says consumer surplus compared to deadweight loss, so we would have this comparison right here to this one over here, but we're missing both the producer surplus and the government revenue, so that's not going to be a good answer. And finally, we have the reduced welfare of buyers and sellers compared to revenue raised by the government, and that's the biggest issue, right? Because this consumer surplus and this producer surplus remains despite the change in prices. The only thing that really changes is that there's deadweight loss here, and also that there's a certain amount of tax revenue going to government. So that's what we care about, the comparison between these two. And so 4 would be the best answer here. So let's take a look at the previous answer. And the previous tutor said 4 as well, and they said the imposition of a tax increases the cost of production for sellers and leads to a reduction in supply, shift the supply curve to the left. Sellers transfer the incidence of the tax onto the buyers, the proportion of which depends on the elasticity of demand and supply. The difference between the price paid by buyers and the price paid by sellers is the amount of the tax that the government receives. The increase in price that buyers pay leads to a reduction in the consumer surplus. Simultaneously, the reduction in price that sellers receive causes a reduction in the producer surplus as well. Collectively, both reductions create inefficiency in the market. A proportion of the aggregate reduction is converted into tax revenue the government earns. The portion of neither goes to the government nor is received by buyers or sellers is known as the deadweight loss. This deadweight loss represents the reduction in economic well-being. Hence, to determine the deadweight loss, we must compare the welfare of buyers and sellers to revenue raised by the government. Right? And so, great answer. Note that tax can also be imposed on the consumer side as well. But otherwise, great answer, and we mark that as correct.